I got you, I go chop you like carrot. If I got you, I go chop you like banana. Are you ready now? She dey killing me, die. She dey killing me, die.
Okay, we are now live on YouTube and Twitter. So let's go ahead and say thank you to Flavor Nabania for lending us some sweet tunes to sort of get started to. And welcome to everybody. As always, today is a special event. Shout out to Sister Lana, Sister Helena, Brother Benny for being here in this space. And we're going to go ahead and get jumping and get started into the program for today. So again, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to AIM Art. I am, as always, your host, your excited host. I mean, this is truly the highlight of my week and weekend. Dr. Ogbonna Nnodim, or Para, pronouns she, her, and all. And as always, I am calling in from the original unceded lands of the Anishinaabe. That is the Three Fires people, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and Potawatomi in the territory of Wawiatanong, otherwise known as Detroit, or the 313. And I recognize and honor my Igbo, African and African diaspora ancestors, communities, and descendants at this very moment as well. As you all know, I am a physician, scholar, scientist, artist, activist, coach, consultant, speaker, mama, wifey, and all of the above, and then some. And my mission in life, my business, professional, and spiritual mission in life is to dismantle the delusional systems of white supremacism by eliminating anti-Black racism from medicine, healthcare, and public health, all while centering and celebrating Black brilliance, Black abundance, and Black joy. I want to again, as always, thank you, and I'm trying to get my wonderful co-host up here. As usual, the internets and the Wi-Fi's don't want us to be great, but we persist, persevere, and overcome regardless. But again, as a reminder, AIM Art is the Anti-Racism in Medicine Action Roundtable, hashtag AIM Art, and we are a transdisciplinary community of unapologetically Black and unapologetically pro-Black, liberatory, pan-African, Afrocentric, Afro-optimists. That means we celebrate and center Black magic, brilliance, excellence, truth, joy, strength, assets, abundance, possibilities, creativity, and future dreaming. And we are committed to developing the innovative knowledge and skills and attitudes that we need to inform the transformative actions that are needed to eliminate anti-Black racism in medicine, healthcare, and public health here in the States and frankly throughout the world. Every week we meet on Saturdays, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and we are proud of our community that we are building strong partnerships with iloveblackpeople.com, with Q Search, which is the or CU Search, which is Canada-US Coalition to End Race Correction in Healthcare, of which I'm a proud co-chair along with my sister Lana James, also my co-host for AIM Art of Ready for Black Lives, Hood Medicine Initiative with wonderful sister Dr. Nisi Hudson, and just really shouting out Black Doc Village with Dr. Grubbs and Dr. Hussein, and Dr. Bonnie Mason with her work with the National Resident Council, supporting our brothers and sisters in training that are being unjustly treated and removed from our profession, and really working for justice in that realm. Please follow all these folks and support them and lift them up. And I want to really shout out Brother Benny and the Black Mental Health Alliance, who is a new partnership, true community folks, value aligned, and I'm just excited by what's about to happen and the ways that we are just blowing up the spot through these powerful partnerships. Again, one of our key fundamental principles in AIM Art is the principle of Ubuntu. I am because we are. Truly the collective, the community is what helps us to stay and to thrive and to be. A couple of housekeeping before keeping points before we get into the nitty gritty of today. And the housekeeping is we are a jumbotron community, meaning that we get a lot of and share resources and evidence and whatever it is on the jumbotron. So pay attention to the top of your screen there when it comes to your aim art screen, and we will be posting primarily me, but really anyone that if you have any resources or anything like that, I'm happy to go ahead and post on the jumbotron, otherwise known as the nest or the dashboard, so that we can share the information. What we want to be is a community that reads and listens and participates in that collective teaching and learning for that growth that we need, right? And so that our opinions, our thoughts, our strategizing, our tactics, our organizing is rooted in what? Knowledge. Is rooted in knowledge, is informed by the evidence we produce. Okay. And so this is very important. I will also be posting a link to our AIM Art community and working very closely with Brother Benny. You will be seeing more about that in terms of building our community online and making sure that we are sharing resources and we are increasing the knowledge of all the folks that are doing the hard work of anti-Black, identifying and eliminating anti-Black racism from the fields of medicine, healthcare, and public health, as well as transforming what is better, creating the new systems that are needed for the healthcare and really well-being and life that is to come, that really centers us, celebrates us, and really upholds and honors all that is beautiful in Blackness. So please amplify this space, tweet out, all the gems that you hear. I am going to right now post a let me see. Okay, Sister Lana is all together. Thank you, sis, for working on that. But I'm going to right now post to the jumbotron the link to the YouTube, so you can go ahead and disseminate that as you see fit. So folks want to sort of participate visually and use the commentary on YouTube, you are welcome to do that. Through the to Twitter is where you can engage in audio wise, so to speak. You can ask questions and participate in that way. But sometimes folks just want to be able to see, watch, and also make their commentary. You are welcome to do that on YouTube. So that's pinned to the jumbotron or the next. Invite folks. We do have a larger group of folks. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And so I know that it's that time of year, honey. Folks are getting ready for school. It's the whole thing. So go ahead and invite folks. We always say go ahead and invite your grandma, your grandpa, your sisters, your brothers, your exes, your frenemies, your haters. Get them all up into the space. Continue to tweet out and use the hashtag AIMART as you and tag us, so we can continue to retweet and get us to be trending on this app. And so with that in mind, let's get into the topic of today. So welcome again. Take a deep breath in, out, whoo. And I just want you to know that this is a special experience for me and for all involved. One of the people that I hail as a hero, as someone that my role model in many things and many ways, a mentor, my teacher, as well as my father, is whom I have the pleasure and the honor, along with my sister Lana, of having a conversation with today to address the topic at hand, which is the Nigeria-Biafra war and why it matters today. What is the significance of it today as it relates to not just Nigeria, not just Africa, but her diaspora? Looking through the lens of history, the untold and the told, the visible and the invisible, information and important sort of historical realities from the experience, not just from an intellectual, right, perspective, but an experiential perspective. Someone that didn't just live through the war, but participated, in the war as well. But why does it matter today? And what does it tell us about how does it inform the work that we do in anti-racism, in the field of medicine, healthcare, and public health? What is that significance, from a global as well as a local and domestic perspective? And so it is my pleasure, my honor, to welcome the one and only Dr. Joseph Ogbonna Nnodim to the Aim at Roundtable. And we'll be hearing from him in a bit. But I want to, as always, welcome my wonderful sister Lana James to the space. And it's been a hot minute, Sister Lana. We have missed you, but you are here. And I want you to go ahead and reintroduce yourself to the space. Help people understand the magnificence that you are, the divinity that you encapsulate, why you are my co-host, and why without you, the roundtable is never the same. Sister Lana, reintroduce yourself and talk to us about what you're holding space for in terms of your spirit today. Sister Lana, are we still having, Sister Lana, we were having some audio issues earlier. So I'm wondering if we are all clear. Go ahead. We can't hear you, but go ahead and send me a DM if you are having challenges. Okay. And so while we're working on that, we'll go ahead to the one and only Dr. Joseph Ogbonna Nnodim, professor, medical doctor, physician for many, many years, former chair of Department of Anatomy and Cell Biology, University of Benin, and father, grandfather, scientist, and an advocate and really a powerful voice for justice and intellectual heavyweights. And I just want to welcome you to this space, Dr. Nnodim, otherwise known as Big Papa. And I want to, first of all, just like I asked Lana to share, if there's anything else you would like to add to your introduction, what else in your bio do you think is important for us to know about you? Because it does inform your positionality as it relates to this conversation today. I'm going to go ahead and mute so that you can unmute.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nnodim, for that very kind, very clearly inflated introduction. I hope the audience don't believe any of it. And I'd like to thank everybody who's been able to join this discussion this afternoon. Lots of other things you could be doing, but you've opted to log in and participate. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Imad for asking me to join in this discussion, this kitchen table discussion today. Ms. Lana James, thank you very much. It clearly is a very, very important subject, traumatic as it is, but it needs to be examined thoroughly, and all the lessons it offers learned for us to be better people. So I've spent some time in the past few years looking at the problems we went through in that part of the world, and I gleaned some understandings which I thought were worth sharing. So as this discussion goes on, we will touch on some of the key points that came across to me. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that, and really getting us started in a powerful way, and which is to begin to. I think the first important question to ask Big Papa is, why did you write this book? And again, the title of your book that is coming out is Towards Understanding the Nigeria-Biafra War and Other Lingering Questions, an Igbo Perspective. Why did you write this book?
I got to writing this book for quite a number of reasons. For one, the Nigeria-Biafra War was probably the most significant and most traumatic event on the African continent. up to that time, and I think it's unsurpassed in that sad reputation. Lots of things, many of them terrible, happened, but they were never properly addressed. Many critical issues were glossed over for reasons we'll get into. And then we shrugged our shoulders and moved on. We, for the most part, didn't learn much. So it happened at a time when I was young and very impressionable, and at early teenage years, events tend to loom large and make a very indelible impression on one's mind. So even though you won't be able to understand them fully, I certainly couldn't wrap my head around all that happened. But as time went by, I reflected on the events that took place, and the enormity of them really struck me. Primarily, the death of over 1 million children, in 30 months of fighting, through starvation, through a deliberate policy of starvation. I thought 1939 to 1945, in those 6 years of Second World War, 6 million Jews died. During the Biafran War, at least 1 million babies died, 1/6 of the number that perished in the Holocaust. And not enough thought has gone into that. That really bothered me. So I tried to understand what led to the crisis, and resulted in so much wastage of very young, innocent human lives. And then put my thoughts down on paper. I thought whatever understandings I gained were worth sharing, so I did. And it struck me that since we hadn't learned enough lessons from that carnage, there were lingering questions that needed to be addressed, and that was my thinking too. And I put those down. And as time went by, one grew up, got married, had children, and Ijoma, sister, brothers, and even their children began to ask questions about what happened, the land of their birth, what major events have taken place, and stories father and grandfather tell their offspring. It struck me that things needed to be put down in writing, so I set about doing that. So those were some of the issues that drove me to the project, and I'm very grateful for all the influences I came under, and all the assistance I received doing it.
You're very welcome. I'm also honored to have contributed as part of the assistance to the writing of the book. And I believe that some of us are featured in the acknowledgements to acknowledge the assistance that we provided, even if it was emotional support. And Dr. Nnodim, as I'm listening to you, and thank you for breaking that down and for really lifting up the fact that, and we're going to get into this more just in terms of your own personal experience. Because it's one thing to write a book, is another to write about a topic of interest, but it's another thing to write about a topic that you lived through. And what I'm also hearing in your voice is this sense of there was an injustice happened that hasn't been duly repaired. There's been harm, and you use the word trauma, which I think is really telling. And in listening to you talk about the trauma, where over I believe the numbers are 1.5 million or so, and I think even those numbers are not altogether exact yet. Still and counting, one might say. that in that acknowledgement, I'm also, as I situate myself in a diaspora context, right? Think about the trauma of the diaspora. So from the continent on to the Americas, on Europe, and all over. I'm also thinking about the trauma of the transatlantic slave trade. I'm thinking about the trauma of colonialism. I'm thinking about the trauma of imperialism. And so I'm wondering, Dr. Nnodim, as we have folks that are listening in, representing all areas of the diaspora today, why does this topic matter to the diaspora? What has been how, in what ways has the Nigeria-Biafran war informed the realities of the African diaspora and being impacted or being informed or influenced by the diaspora herself? And how does that experience sit within this global traumatic experience of African peoples?
Thank you, and that's a very, very, very important question, kind of difficult one to answer. But the conflict was very, very profoundly racialized. You remember Dr. Martin Luther King, even from the very, very beginning of his public ministry, from the time of Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, he made it clear that he saw no difference between colonialism and racial segregation in the American South. They shared two principles. One was a contempt for human life, and then the tragic doctrine of white supremacy. So he did not make any distinction between colonialism and the racist policies that were flourishing in the South in the 50s before the civil rights movement took hold. So it did resonate with Black African Americans here. As we know, Africa in 1884, the 13 European powers gathered in Berlin and carved it up into areas as what they call spheres of influence, which eventually they began to just exploitation and then convenient exploitation, and then eventually reorganized them into countries they administered as colonial vassals. Then after 1945, when they had fought themselves to near total exhaustion, they very reluctantly agreed to grant independence to these countries. Now, you find these countries are just lines on a map, very arbitrary, oftentimes arbitrary. They run through communities that dividing them up into pieces and then merging pieces with other pieces, ignoring affinities and disaffinities and things of that kind. So the entire continent was a hodgepodge of a collage of these kinds of political arrangements. And that was problematic. Nigeria was one such country, in fact, the entire continent. So that was very problematic. These groups never had anything really in common, and hard as they tried, they couldn't quite find some kind of unifying principle of any kind. So it was difficult for them to get ahead. When they became independent and eventually formed an organization called the Organization of African Unity, the OAU. They enshrined in its charter the principle that the colonial boundaries inherited at independence were going to be immutable. They were going to be changed. Now, the fear was that since they all looked alike, if it happened in any one country, then the entire continent was going to unravel. Now that was difficult. That was very, very problematic. Now the civil rights movement here in the United States here had a problem. They had a big problem. Their understanding of Africa was, I'm afraid, very superficial. We had all bought into the white notion that the highest and most sophisticated, most civilized form of political organization was a nation state. So if you had a nation state, it just has to succeed. And for some reason, they believe that the success of the nation states, the new nation states in Africa, would be testimony to the readiness of the African American to acquire civil rights and participate fully in the democratic process here in the United States. So there's this collateral between governance in Africa, the complexities of governance, which they didn't understand, complexities of governance. They tied that to mere participation in political processes. So that created a problem. When the incongruities, when problems arose in Nigeria, the polity overheated and crisis after crisis, people were being killed. They couldn't, they became confused and they became very confused. I didn't know what to do. If Nigeria failed, it would reflect poorly on African Americans. So black people couldn't, they couldn't get themselves together and run a country. So why should they participate in American democracy? So that was a problem they grappled with. And after some thinking, they fell behind the OAU and said, okay, you should deal with this. But then OAU was a conflicted organization to begin with. It was a very conflicted organization, given its founding charter and its principles. So the diaspora had a problem. They didn't quite understand that ethnicity was a big problem in these African states. And for many people back in Africa, for many people, ethnicity was probably the only genuine thing, the only genuine construct about their identity. Everything else was foisted on them by the British, by people from outside. So that was the only thing tangible they could hold on to that described them accurately. And you didn't joke with that. You try to understand it properly, which I don't think was done by people contemplating the situation from outside. So the African American community here, at the level of the leadership, they made a terrible mistake. But then individuals themselves, the ordinary people, many of them understood what was going on, and their support for the Biafran effort was tremendous on a humanitarian level, and even some on a political level. So the message for the diaspora is that when we begin to look back at the continent and try to make sense of what goes on there, we should not be intellectually lazy. We should be willing to do the hard work of trying to understand at a very deep level what the dynamics, what exactly happens there. Because not be very fanciful and make unrealistic expectations of these countries. But by 1966, there were about 30 independent countries. Not one had managed to conduct a credible census or conduct decent elections. Not one. Governance was difficult. Diversity was not, was just a liability. It wasn't an asset. Just because there was no unifying, no common narrative. None of them could find any story to tell that connected one person to the other. So we made that mistake. Diversity is wonderful, but then there should be a unifying narrative if we can't find it, we have a problem. We have to think very, very, very hard.
Okay, that was like a whole dissertation right there. I mean, where do I even start to unpack? I want to toss it over to Sister Lana in a bit, but while she's collecting her thoughts, because you dropped a lot right there. I want to reflect on a couple of points that I noted that are very important and relevant to our conversations today as Pan-Africans and Pan-Africanists and folks who are about the diaspora. Is that as we have these conversations, what I'm hearing is the importance of nuance. There are two pieces that jump out to me: importance of nuance and granularity, and as well as the ways in which whiteness, white supremacism, just like F's everything up on multiple levels across the globe. And we're talking on the roundtable about the global nature of white supremacy and how it informs even something such as this. And I know later we're going to talk about how colonialism was, and the relationship with the British was part of, as we get into the war itself, was part of the catalyst for this Nigeria-Biafra war, as the country was seeking is to be truly independent in a meaningful way. So it's just so one piece being the white supremacist piece, and in what you said, I'm just reflecting on the way in which, and I like how you call it a hodgepodge of political arrangements, the scramble for Africa, right? The dissecting and the surgical desiccation of this continent by creating a hodgepodge of political arrangements and then calling them countries that were respectless, shall I say, of unique identifiers that were indigenous and autonomous to the folks that lived on the ground, and the forced coalition and coalescing of a peoples that did not define their own destiny because it was in service to developing what is now known as the Western world, what is now known as Europe and the Americas. And so just understanding how that action still informs the way in which the North America particularly and Europe interact with the continent, and how that still is a challenge in Nigeria, specifically identifying herself and building out who she is and what she is in this world, right? So just noting how that play the role, this idea of again, whiteness setting up a standard for what is correct. As we talk about development, what exactly is developed? What does that mean? Who is the standard by which the barometer that we're measuring development, right? Who should that look like? So the same way that to be a successful nation is one that follows the format of a nation state vis-a-vis how Europe arranged herself. The same Europe that still doesn't know herself and is struggling today vis-a-vis Brexit, right? Or how the United States arrange itself as well. I'm going to pause here because we're having some difficulty with Twitter. Twitter just so I'm going to pause here, Dr. Nnodim. We're going to pause for a second. I'm going to reset the room for Twitter. So give me 1 second to create another. Okay. So folks on YouTube, please note that our Twitter space crashed. So I'm going to get it started. But while I'm doing that, Dr. Nnodim, why don't you continue just sort of reflecting on this piece that I'm naming around the ways in which the systems of white supremacy we like to say the delusions of white supremacism, because they truly are not supreme. Like to think they are, but these systems of delusional systems of white supremacism shows up in the ways that our nation states are defined, and how that informed, therefore, and served as a catalyst to this war. I want to now link what you are talking about to this war. And then there's the other piece of the nuance that you mentioned that we'll talk about in a bit, but I kind of want to zoom into this and link into how it catalyzed this war and also inform the ways in which today's Nigeria is dealing with the legacy of the war, of the Nigeria-Biafra war.
Yeah, thank you indeed. You make a very, very important point about nuance and granularity in the analysis. Being superficial creates problems. Being superficial creates problems. The white supremacy and their thinking, the thinking that flows from it, it shows up everywhere. They very, very strongly oppose the restructuring of the countries in any way. Very, very, but then arrogated to themselves the right to form federations and break them up if they didn't like them. In East Africa, for instance, was the Northern Rhodesia, then Southern Rhodesia, and then Nyasaland, Southern Rhodesia, Northern Rhodesia became Zambia, then Nyasaland became Malawi, and they broke them up, you know. There was a federation. When it didn't suit them to continue, they were happy to break that up. Even in India, Britain, masterminded and midwifed the birth of the breakup of India and created Pakistan. They did it. But then, you know, I mean, they got too exercised over Nigeria and were very, very, very upset over whatever, and not paying sufficient attention to what really was happening to people, the kind of suffering people were undergoing. And it was very, very racist. It was very racist. But see, in terms of how things would have gone, there were two streams of thought as of 1961. As you know, the independence began with Ghana in 1957, and then by 1961, quite a number of countries had become independent. And they sorted into two groups. There was the Casablanca group, most vocal exponent of which was Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, Francis Kwame Nkrumah. They were advocating a pan-Africanist vision. People getting together, more together, forming alliances, and eventually working towards federation. And then there was the Monrovia group to which my country, our country, Nigeria, belonged. Oh, they didn't want any of that. Individual countries had to be self-governing and didn't want to do much with it. You know, the relationships have to be very, very, very superficial, and there should be no movement towards political federation on a continent-wide supranational basis. So eventually the two groups met in 1963 and formed the OAU, and the views of the Monrovia group, prevailed. So that became the doctrine of the OAU, the Continental Organization. Nation states we are going to be sovereign and totally, pretty much isolated with very minimal contact between one another. No country interfering with the internal affairs of the other country, and so on and so forth. So the problem, I think the major part of the struggle was lost at that point. The colonial boundaries were frozen with the problems that came with them, and then we couldn't really move forwards. Even in the Caribbean, there were problems too. There were problems with the West Indies. As usual, the British, they made things up and then dismantled them when it didn't suit them. It was that kind of, clearly racist attitude and approach to governance.
And I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And from a nuanced standpoint, then what I also, let's see, go ahead and mute. Okay, thank you. All right, we're good. All right, give me 1 second. All right. Thank you all for your patience as we try to get it together here from a tech standpoint. Thank you to Twitter for crashing, and then at least we're able to get back on, so we're back on Twitter. Thank you, YouTube, for hanging with us. Thank you all of y'all out there and your patience, and we love you. Thank you. And so, Dr. Nnodim, as you were saying, I think beautifully, just really tying in the role of the systems of white supremacism and how they frankly the racist and anti-black approaches informed or influenced the ways in which Africa and African nations defined themselves or not, and the inability to do so while reserving for themselves the right to self-determination and creating themselves what they need in order to maintain and protect their interests. I also thought it was interesting around the idea of nuance, and it gives a lot of food for thought, right? When engaging with the continent, and you can engage with in the continent through the lens of race versus the lens of ethnicity. And I'm wondering about where those two intersect and overlap, and where they stand by themselves. Here in the US, this is a country built on race, right? Racism, white supremacism created this idea of race. And so, by force and fire, right, through the transatlantic slave trade, different ethnicities from the continent needed to, they became black because they were told that that's what they were, right? Because folks created the idea of white. And that, when, and of course, folks had to build that community, and had to sort of create new identities from the reality of the transatlantic slave trade. And what I found interesting that you lifted up is how, when we are looking at outside of the Americas, right? And we take that American lens of race to view and analyze and understand what's happening in various aspects of the diaspora, principally the continent, that lens may be flawed if we are not understanding that folks identify themselves more so along the lines of ethnicity. And there's also an intersectionality with gender and class, um, and religion. But all those things intersect, but in a different way than they do here. And that becomes necessary to know how we build coalition in terms of liberation movements on the continent. And that is sort of what especially I'm sewing in also your comments around the ways in which African American leaders versus and there's another nuance that you lifted up there, but how African American leaders during civil rights kind of struggled when things weren't going the way they anticipated on the ground, and connecting that to their destiny here in the Americas. And the nuance I also picked up that you said was that the ways in which African American leaders interacted with the cause of Biafra and Nigeria-Biafra civil war was different from the ways in which the average African American brother or sister on the ground was interacting with that. Whereas the leadership was looking at it through the lens of, well, we're all brothers and sisters, and let's work together and prove that we can self-govern as Black people. It sounded like the folks on the ground understood that that might not necessarily be the appropriate lens of analysis, and we might need to think about it differently. Is that an accurate sort of assessment of what you're offering?
It is, but thinking evolved. They started off on the wrong foot. The civil rights leadership started off on what I would consider the wrong foot. But unfortunately, tragic events happened. In fact, the American Negro Leadership Conference on Africa was going to visit Nigeria sometime in April 1968. Martin Luther King, Dr. King was going to be part of the mission, and a few other very prominent leaders. Then it clashed with the Poor People's March he was planning for that month. The preparations were advanced, and he also had the Selma sanitation workers protest he was going to go to. So he said, okay, well, this vision of the ANLCA was very, very important. He probably won't be able to go. But he'll send the Reverend Ralph Abernathy to go in his place. This was on. He said that he said that in an interview on the 1st of April 1968. A few days later, he was killed. Now, if he had gone and seen for himself, and I would imagine he'd have gone to Nigeria and then probably gone to Biafra as well, and seen for himself, being the very, very keen student he is, it must have, the trip would have set up some serious thoughts in his mind. But that didn't happen. He died, and after his death, that movement pretty much collapsed, and the more militant Black Power movement went on the ascendant. Stokely Carmichael and the rest of them. So I think thinking would have evolved. They would have come off this view and gone in a slightly different direction, a more helpful direction, I'd have thought. But that didn't happen. Now the point of thinking about ethnicity, it's something the African Americans have no concept of here. In the diaspora, they have no concept of that. To a certain extent, we've all been homogenized into believing we're just Black. Now that works because there is some external challenge. We're unified in that. There's an external challenge we need to address. That's the thinking and practices of the racist white man
and woman.
Now, if that goes away, the risk of cleavages in the Black community will escalate.
Mm-hmm.
That's bound to happen. Now, I mean, you all too familiar with murmurings about who's Black enough, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Some people are not as Black as others. Some people don't have a slave experience and things like that. That is terrible, and it could worsen. But for as long as you have an external adversary, an external challenge to confront, those internal cleavages will stay muted and under control. So it's something the Black community has to be, but the community of diaspora has to be intellectually nimble and very, very alert too, and make sure it remains focused and able to redirect itself and recognize new challenges and turn attention towards them, rather than let potential divisions within the community, which exist and are dormant. Let them spring to life. That risk always exists. They don't know, back home in Africa, in Nigeria and other places in Africa, the ethnicity, like I say, it's the one thing people, they will tell you, I'm this before I'm that, that kind of feeling. I'm this before I'm that. Everything else, was foisted on them. And it's like athletes, for instance, these super athletes. when they get the endorsements. The only thing that's probably left to them is their body. The shirt they wear is Nike or whatever, that kind of a thing. So that's, the only way to express themselves is by the way they do their hair, the kind of tattoos they put on their skin, and so on and so forth. So people get reduced to thinking about themselves in very narrow ways, which can be dangerous. The intellectual class did not do us any favors. They don't do us any good service by not bringing up these kinds of things that will create problems and pointing us in directions to steer away from them.
Yeah, no, I hear that. And I just want to make a quick announcement. So Twitter space crashed again. We're just going to go ahead and continue here on YouTube and Twitter live. And that should be fine. And we'll post this on Twitter. And please, you are welcome to start putting in comments, questions, feedback, whatever have you. And Sister Lana, I would love to offer your questions to Dr. Nnodim as well. So if you can put that on, you're always welcome to come on live and participate, but I also know that you're multitasking. So go ahead, everyone is welcome to go ahead and throw in the comments, chat your questions, thoughts, comments, feedback, etc. And so Dr. Nnodim, again, thank you for lifting that up. I was also thinking about how, this idea of ethnicity and the reimagining of ethnicity in the US or in the Americas, right? If you're from New York, right? If you're from Chicago, if you're from Detroit, if you're from Philly, if you're from Mississippi, it's different. If you're from New Orleans, I think there is also a form of ethnicity, that is recreated even here, that is along geographical locations that also intersects with culture. Because Black folks in New Orleans, they have some unique traits that differentiate them from Black folks in Detroit, which differentiate them from Black folks in LA, and etc. And so I wonder also about that. And then of course there's this intersectionality of religion and class. So with that being said, I want us to pivot a little bit to bringing it to health and healthcare and public health. Some folks may say, what does this have to do with the work we're trying to do in healthcare, in public health, in medicine, in the sciences, particularly the biomedical sciences, especially in what we're trying to do around anti-racism in medicine and healthcare and public health, and naming anti-Blackness, and why is it important to understand the dynamics of the Nigeria-Biafra war, and have that inform the lens through which we address systemic and structural racism in healthcare, public health, and medicine?
Yeah, thanks for that question. The Nigeria-Biafra war had tremendous implications for public health, especially. Some analysts have called it a Holocaust in the age of Aquarius. It was the very first public health disaster at the dawn of the television age. Every day, every evening in the Western world, in the evening news, they broadcast pictures of starving children, skeletal with bloated abdomens, suffering from protein calorie malnutrition. So that was a big problem. That was a big problem at the time, and the world responded to that. The world responded to that more than they did to the political issues that underpinned that gave rise to the situation. So by 1968, by the middle of 1968, Biafra was largely encircled. It was largely encircled. The food producing areas had been overrun by federal troops, and agriculture collapsed. So it was totally reliant now on food flown in from outside, and that could hardly be enough. By 68, we had lost the large airports, and a small one that was built at the Uli airstrip came on stream. But that could just not meet the challenge. Oxfam came. That's the Oxford Foundation for Famine Relief. They sent their Director General who came to Biafra, and he estimated that unless 300 tons of relief supplies were flown in every night, that 5 million babies would succumb to kwashiorkor, that's the protein calorie malnutrition, and die within 6 weeks. He made that estimate, went back to London, briefed ministers in Harold Wilson's government. They were horrified. Harold Wilson himself was shamed into asking the federal government of Nigeria to grant the International Committee of the Red Cross permission for relief planes to fly missions into Biafra. The federal government quickly refused. Within 40 hours, they said that wasn't going to happen, that they were going to shoot down any aircraft that was destined for Biafra. And within 11 months, they made good on that threat. They actually shot down in broad daylight a Red Cross, clearly marked Red Cross aircraft. So the people who continued, who just disregarded the bluster and the threats of violence from the federal government, were the Joint Church Aid Consortium. That's they call it JCA. You call it Jesus Christ Airlines. These are the Caritas of Catholic Church, the World Council of Churches, and then not Church Aid. These guys did terrible things. They flew in all sorts of weather, brought relief supplies in, and then helped the Biafran Red Cross run 650 centers. 650 centers for resuscitating these famished babies. Now, these centers could take only 1 million. But the total number of internally displaced people was nearly 4 million. So the rest were, which is interesting. I spent quite some time describing the way the Igbo family is structured, with all these interstices, like a sponge walk. It absorbed, the extended family system just absorbed them in. And then only these 1 million had to stay in refugee camps and had to be fended for. Now, since the ICRC wasn't doing much, but they had personnel on ground. And amongst them, about 65 personnel, amongst them was one Dr. Bernard Kushner. Dr. Bernard Kushner and Dr. Pascal Bosviel, they were horrified. They were very, very horrified at what they saw. The depth of depravity people would sink to in order to make a point about lines on a map. So they were so horrified that in 1971, soon after the conflict, they founded Médecins Sans Frontières, which we're all very familiar with now. Médecins Sans Frontières now goes to all conflict zones and provides help for people in need, regardless of the political implications, regardless of what the lines on the map were. So in 1999, actually, they won the Nobel Peace Prize. So that's the effect the Biafran War had on public health globally. internally, haven't turned inwards, haven't blockaded completely and turned inwards and looking. The doctors and healthcare professionals in the country did wonders in improvisation. They were just it's unbelievable. Food scientists researched the nutritional value of items we didn't know were edible or had any contributed anything to useful to health. They researched them and enriched the cuisine. In fact, the research team developed a cholera vaccine, led by Dr. Augustine Njokobi. They developed the cholera vaccine in the middle of a terrible war. So advances were made in the midst of all that suffering, in public health.
Oh, okay. I apologize. I was multitasking a little bit. I was also daydreaming also about that inventiveness of the Igbo, where even in the midst of such incredible devastation, people are out here sciencing. People are out here inventing vaccines and medicine. And I remember you telling us stories about how we created airports, like they will be destroyed, and that same night or so, people were hustling, creating airports so that airplanes coming in with supplies will have a place to land. Can you talk a little bit more about that inventiveness in the midst of devastation, the opportunities that folks found to be creative regardless of destruction all around, and incredible trauma?
Indeed. I mean, the struggle was existential. We had nowhere to turn to, but inwards and to ourselves, back against the war. So you just had to either think things up, and do them, or you perished. Back in Africa, the bane of societies, inability to maintain things. You'd find us will put up big structures and spend a lot of money, put them up, and then they just decay over time. With no maintenance culture. But in Biafra, they built an airport. The Uli airport, it was just one strip. Yeah, it's just one strip. But it was the second busiest airport in Africa, behind Johannesburg. It's the second busiest. Heavy freight strato cruisers would land, and within 30 minutes, this was without mechanization, no special equipment. 30 minutes, they would offload, get it ready, turn it around, and send it out again. 30 minutes. It's unbelievable. This was all self-thought. And the Nigeria force would come, drop bombs, crater the runway. But before nightfall, they'd have repaired it and be ready to take heavy freight aircraft for that night. It's just unspeakable. And we pay very, very little attention. That's one part, that's one aspect of the crisis after it ended. This failure, this refusal, it wasn't just a refusal to harness the ingenuity and talent that was unleashed. There was one military governor who tried to do that. He sent out such teams immediately the war, he sent out such teams to round up, see if he could find all those scientists, bring them to his state, that he was going to support them so they could continue the work they were doing. The federal government had that and sent him instructions to cease and desist. So people just gave up. It's unbelievable, the kind of the explosion of talent, the explosion of activity, the resourcefulness that was unleashed. It could, we complain about a gasoline shortage in Biafra. We're drilling for petroleum. We get the petroleum, we'll refine it, get the fractions out, distribute them. There was jet fuel, gasoline, whatever. We did all of that with very crude equipment. We built ourselves. So it was tremendous. It's something. If we had thought about things properly, we say, okay, fine, regardless of whatever happened, let's foster this. I mean, America couldn't have gone, or even the Soviet Union then couldn't have gone to the moon or space. They couldn't have without German talent. It couldn't have happened. It could have taken 20, 30 more years. But after the war, they simply got these scientists together and got them to go ahead. How do I complaints? Oh, many of them are Nazis and so on and so forth. Well, fair enough, they were. But they got the science done. They made positive contributions, and we're all the better for it. But in our own case, that never worked. All that talent, and they atrophied. They weren't nourished, so they just atrophied. People just went back and led their ordinary lives. But the challenge no longer was there. But the people responded. The people did respond to the challenge. People did. They rose to it.
And that seems very clear, and I think that continues in today. I think one of the characteristics known among the Igbo is the ability to be inventive and creative despite like challenges. I am struggling with the comparison with German talent, like that analogy, and the advances that I enjoyed that were made by the U.S. and the importance of incorporating German science. And I guess that is part of the conversation, I think, and holding the nuance in how you, I don't know, reconcile the things that horrible people did and then the advances or the benefit, not benefits, but the advances or the innovations that came out of horrible things. And I think it depends on what side of the aisle you are in terms of the horrible things, where you're on the side of who committed the atrocities or who experienced the atrocities, to determine how valuable that innovation actually is. And I just wonder, from the side, from an Igbo side of folks who suffered harm versus the side of Germans who perpetuated harm, if we are talking about similar things. I struggle about that, and I wonder if folks in the audience may also struggle with that comparison. Can you speak to that? Does that make sense?
Certainly. That's a very interesting point you make there. The difference is pretty much clear. The Igbo were the victims of that conflict. Mm-hmm. Whatever talent they produced, I don't think there should have been much circumspection. There have been very little to sort through, to exploit it. It have just been admitted into these whatever mechanisms existed and allowed them to go ahead. I mean, the victors, they had their privileges; they could do these things, but they chose not to. It was a matter of the choosing not to, and the attitude to there are aspects to this that preceded the war, the attitude to the war, which I did spend a lot of time discussing in the book. Many other groups felt we come across as very arrogant, that we didn't wear successes with humility. We tended to rub people's nose in it and things of that kind. And we had now been beaten in war, so we've had a come up answer, and we should just disappear. And that was a total loss to the country. It was a big loss to the country. And that's different from what the experience was in Europe. After the Second World War. Germany was the bad side, and they lost the war. The top space scientist, Werner von Braun, very young man. He was phenomenal. He was just phenomenal. He was a genius. But it was in the Nazi Party. Well, people who, his people who kind of made excuses for him. Well, he just, if he didn't join the Nazi Party, then he wouldn't get support for his work. But there was no direct implication of Werner von Braun in any atrocities, so to speak, other than the fact that he led the teams that built the V weapons that delivered explosives to London and the rest of them. But again, you talk about nuance. You have been nuanced in your thinking. Yeah, fair enough. This is all bad, but he had something we needed. So he was brought over to the United States, and he led the team that developed the rocket that put man on the moon, the Saturn V rocket. Without him, it couldn't have happened. I mean, that's clear. So yeah, it's all nuanced thinking. Such people, you don't give them big prominent roles in the public sphere, but with that kind of a background, even though he wasn't directly involved in at the personal level with atrocities that happened in the Nazi regime.
And I think that I think with the lens of sort of social justice today, what we are learning, and we'll move forward as we're rounding up the conversation, is what we're learning is that whether folks are actively participating or not, that there's still complicity, and I think that actually connects to one of our concluding questions here, is as we look at Nigeria today and we see what's going on, the elections coming up, the way the politics is organized, the continuous sort of discrimination against the Igbos, politically, economically, and otherwise. I think there was a policy by, was it Gowon or so, that says no victor, no vanquished. Is that, I don't know if I'm saying that incorrectly, please correct me. And so as we look at folks that may be here today that did not necessarily participate actively in the atrocities of, the late 60s and 70s during the war, and folks that are like, well, as we well know, people say, get over it. This thing happened a long time ago. Some people say I wasn't born. Some people said, I mean, I was in the party, but I did not do anything, like this doctor that you're referencing. But at the end of the day, how does that speak to people's responsibility today? Whether the people that are still alive or the people that have gone, what does that speak to? In what ways are people even today complicit in the perpetuation of injustices that were never sort of repaired or healed, right? in the silencing, in the denial, piece. And maybe because they have something of benefit, maybe because they are smart, they are scientists, they are economists, they are, they have something of benefit to the nation. How do we reconcile people's responsibility and role today in creating the Nigeria that we all dream and hope for, which has repercussions across the diaspora, as you pointed out, you still had and still does. And how do we reconcile that their role and obligation today and what happened in the so-called past? As we know, the past is never gone. The past is present and continues onward. What does that mean and look like today in terms of, the Nigerian political landscape and the position of the Igbo in that?
Thanks for that question. It's very profound. My thinking, what I came away with was that the Nigeria-Biafra war was not fair, in which Nigeria as a nation lost its innocence. That's my sadness. Terrible things were done. Nobody's been held to account. We know nobody will, because of, what we call victor's justice. But beginning in May 1966, between May 1966 and December 1966, about 60,000 people of the East, mostly Igbo, were slaughtered, were killed, just killed. Nobody, not one person was held to account for that. This was before the war. Then during the war, through a deliberate policy, this was a deliberate policy at the very highest level. It was decided that starvation was going to be weaponized. Now, adults don't starve. People who have guns don't starve. People soldiers never starve. In no war has it ever happened. When you say you are going to use starvation as a weapon of war, you are targeting children and very vulnerable people. You can't escape that. That's what you're doing. That is what's happening. I mean, nobody's going to be punished for that. But one would have thought, my thinking was that some of the people who were responsible for that policy, either making it or carrying it out, should, in the interest of human decency, openly admit that a grievous mistake was made. And we're sorry. Instead, they start pointing, the rebels should have just laid down their arms and, they should have just accepted. That's very specious. It's specious, it's spurious, it's false, it's patently false. That never happened. Now, okay, in a culture in which 1 million babies, 1 million children die, and nobody's held to account, how can you expect, what moral appeal would you have for people in that culture when you hand them material resources to take care of, and then they use it whatever way they like? There's a sense of impunity in the national psyche. Who can do things and get away with them? 1 million people died there, nothing happened. It's that kind of effect the war had. People developed a certain impunity that they believed they could do things and nothing would happen to them. It's had repercussions in all directions, and it's affected just about everything. And so there's a recklessness in behavior of the political class, and we see it every day. They do things, and what's anybody going to do? Nothing. And really, nothing happens. So I think it's that, we lost our innocence at that point and never made any serious attempt to reclaim it. And we're the worse for it today.
Yeah, that sense of lost innocence and the continuous impunity in which people are exhibiting harm. Do you think that your book will be a catalyst to that national apology and admission of harms that were done? Do you think that your book can act towards facilitating that happening?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I think the point I try to make in the book, that this is necessary. I'm just pointing out this is worth doing. There was some, what what nations have done in this century, or the past century, beginning of the past century, is have what's called it truth and reconciliation arrangements, whereby people who've wronged one another come together on the same forum and admit what's gone wrong and ask for forgiveness, and they are forgiven, and to the extent that they say they're genuinely penitent, and no penalties are imposed. It's worked well in some areas, and you remember, I think we've had that discussion when you went to Rwanda. You remarked that it worked wonderfully in Rwanda, and everything seems placid there. But on analysis, you find it does matter under whose auspices the truth and reconciliation mechanism is been conducted.
Yeah.
Now, there was something like that in Nigeria at some point, but it was very disappointing. It was very, very disappointing and even ridiculous. They probably they didn't. To my mind, very few people who went to it understood what it was all about. Many of them went there to, mainly rehash their grievances and stayed there. That kind of a thing. Why we did this, how the war all along have been very, very troublesome. They've all they wanted was seize power and all that kind of thing. When we went through all of that, very few people, nobody, I don't think anybody mentioned that there was a policy. There was a policy that resulted in the death of over 1 million children. What you find is even in the story, when they tell it, I call it a vaulting narrative. The vault. When they tell the story of what's happened in the country, they come as close as 1965 or maybe 66. Then they jump. That kind of denial having useful purpose. The vault from that to 1970-71, and then continue the story. Maybe 2 or 3 lines about what happened during the war. So most of it false anyway. So it's I'm hoping readers of the book will spend time reflecting. Just pause and reflect. Something terrible happened.
Yeah.
Something terrible. You can't, children can. I mean, adults can pick up weapons and shoot one another. Well, that's business, being stupid. But what? If you engage in a policy that results in the death of over 1 million children, that's a crime. That's a crime against humanity.
Humanity.
That is a crime against humanity. And you just don't. Oh, it happened 60 years ago. Get over it. I don't think so. All this recklessness is something subliminal. Something in the psyche that's, something is rattling in the national psyche that's not been resolved. That's the reason for all this recklessness and you find in on the political scene, and people are literally behaving like wild animals. It's just because they've not really sat down and reflected on where we came from, how we got to the point we are at. That's my thinking, and I'm hoping whoever reads the book will spend some time and come to some understanding of what happened. I approached it from the point of view of an Igbo, Onyibo, in conflicts, like I say, in the hunt. In the hunt, the story you hear is, what the hunter did, and so up and down and shot people, and you very rarely, hear what happened to the quarry. Yeah, this is an attempt to present that viewpoint. I by all means lots of disagreement, and that's very welcome. But come forward, say what you think. Let's hear what you think. I'm be honest about it. Be honest about it. Come forward with what you think after some thought, not just flying off the handle and do some thinking and come up with what you think.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, this has been a fantastic conversation. I want to round up the conversation by reading an excerpt from a blog entry that I sent you earlier. And when you talked about crimes against humanity and denial, I thought that this person's analysis was excellent. Brother Ahmed Olayinka Sule, who is a Yoruba man. And he wrote this fantastic article. And folks, I will post it on YouTube, on Twitter later on today. And his brother is who sent it to me. And he just had this. I mean, he pretty much, it's as if he read your book and summarized it powerfully and made an amazing argument. And I wanted to read this excerpt and ask you my last question to take us home. And I'll also ask you how folks can get your book, because we're already getting, feedback from the audience about that. And then, audience, we will come to you and open it up to you. I want to talk about your comments and your questions. The rest of the conversation is really your floor and your your platform. And so I want to invite you to participate. I know that Dr. Nnodim has brought up so many items for conversation, so much food for thought. This is a rich book. I know this is a book that will be in a textbook to be studied in classrooms and schools, and because it truly is a history that folks are fighting to sweep under the carpet, but cannot. We have a saying about pregnancy. We will always, at some point, we will find it. It's like a pregnancy, right? At some point, it will reveal itself. At some point, it will reveal itself. Lights cannot be hidden. These things have a way of showing up some kind of way. I think this is a powerful book in terms of Igbo, in terms of Nigeria, in terms of Africa, in terms of African diaspora, and in terms of the world. To really provide a perspective, a unique and powerful perspective, which is the perspective of those that went through. And I think at another juncture, we would love to hear, Dr. Nnodim, your own experience living the war, living through this war, and even participating in that. And I believe that you covered that in your book. And I think it's fantastic the way that you treated and juxtapose your personal experience with the scholarship that surrounds the work. So I want to read this excerpt from this blog, because I think it beautifully encapsulates pretty much what you said. And so Mr. Olayinka Sule says when starvation becomes a key tool for winning a war, a policy which leads to millions of people, majority children, dying of starvation, then those behind such cruel, inhumane policies should have been dragged to the courts for war crimes. According to Genocide Watch, and this is key, and this idea of denial, the anti-genocide organization, there are 8 stages of genocide. The first 7 stages include classification, symbolization, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, and extermination. In the case of Biafra, all these 7 stages were completed. However, in today's Nigeria, the final stage of the Biafran genocide has been completed, and that is denial. Unfortunately, as time has passed by, the denial of the genocide that took place during the war is in full force. Per Genocide Watch, denial is the 8th stage that always follows the genocide. It is among the surest indicators of further genocidal massacres. The perpetrators of genocide dig up the mass graves, burn the bodies, try to cover up the evidence, and intimidate the witnesses. They deny that they committed any crimes and often blame what happened on the victims. And why I think your book, Dr. Nnodim, is powerful is this. When that happens, that is a setup to do what? Repeat it. And I think that is what we cannot abide. When a people, and that is, if nothing else, the power of truth and reconciliation, which is that it is done in such a way that we are shining the light, that when we can shine the light, perhaps we can prevent this from repeating itself, right? They that they determine not to learn from their history are doomed to repeat it. And so for me, the power of this book, why this book needs to be, bestseller in the whole wide world, is that this cannot happen again, but it will happen again if we are committed to not remembering, right? And saying never again. We must remember never again. It's very critical that this altar, I would say, was built in memory, if for nobody else, those 1 million children. Those 1 million children. So I want to end on this question, and then we will jump into the chat. And I'm hoping that folks, you are asking your questions and comments. I'll be reading some of them in a minute. But what can we, Dr. Nnodim, learn? We that are doing the work of anti-racism, calling out anti-Black racism locally, domestically here in the US, but also globally, at home and throughout the world. What can we learn from your book, from the Nigeria-Biafra war? What are there any lessons that we can deduce to inform the justice work that we are doing in medicine, healthcare, and public health?
Okay, thanks for the question. I believe in a general way, it's important to maintain or gain some awareness of the historical underpinnings of whatever situation you are in. It's very, very important. Laborious, but it's important to understand the historical background. And secondly, to be aware of the reality you confront, what's before you. There's always a reality. You should understand it properly as you try to change it. And then the third thing is you need alliances for change. You need alliances. And I say this because we in alliance, very strong alliances too. External to your own organization, you need alliances from outside. And within your own organization, within your own group, the fact that everybody is not on the wagon, it should not be an impediment. You don't need everybody. You don't need 100% participation to get things done. That's a delusion. People think, no, not everybody is in it. It doesn't have to be. Oftentimes, it's just a critical mass, and that critical mass differs. It depends on the project, depends on who these people are. And as soon as you achieve it, you move forward. People will learn. People will learn. People will learn. It comes to people at different rates. Some people are very quick on the uptake. They know exactly this is what they're getting on board with, and others approach things more slowly. So, in all the kind of work AMAT is doing, so you try, maintain this level of intellectual curiosity and involvement. Make sure you understand what's in the background, what has gone before. History is very, very, very important. My background is is in life sciences. You'll find writing a good paper, in the sciences, you must do the historical review, the literature. Yeah, you must know what people have done before. So you have to actually um, get familiar with the historical background to whatever you are approaching. Get a sense for where things are at, what the reality is at that time. So you know what you are tussling with, try to change it. And then build allies from around. And then that kind of guarantees that's what offers the best guarantee of success in these attempts to move things along and enact change.
Thank you. I think that's outstanding advice. I certainly relate to all of them. One of the things we harp on over and over again is the power of history. You must know where you're coming from in order to know how you're moving forward. I think that is really key. And then the other key about you don't need everybody to be on the bandwagon. I'm a huge fan of that. You don't. You just, like you said, the critical mass. We always remind people of Harriet Tubman. She didn't need everybody jumping on that Underground Railroad. If you're not ready, it's okay. Stay in slavery. The rest of the people that are interested, let's go. And I'm a huge fan of Auntie Harriet. So thank you so much for those lessons learned. Now let's move to the audience. And the first piece I want to lift up in the audience here is, where can we get this book? When and where can we get your book, Towards Understanding the Nigeria-Biafra War and Other Lingering Questions and Igbo Perspective? Can you tell us where and when the book is coming out, where folks can get it?
Yeah, thanks for asking. It went to the press department a couple of weeks ago. So in another couple of weeks, no more than, I think they said no, it won't take longer than in another week or two, they will send me a few copies to look at, and then they begin the first run. So I would imagine in about 3 weeks, it should be available on Amazon.
Wonderful.
And Barnes and Noble and the rest of them.
Wonderful.
But definitely in Amazon, yeah.
Okay, great. And we have someone, I want to first of all shout out everybody hanging with us. Thank you so much. I want to shout out, Sivas Lender, who is a wonderful supporter of AMAT. I have Mrs. Ngozi Gloria Nnodim, my fantastic, fantabulous, and fearless leader of a mother who is online as well. And I'll be sharing her thoughts in a bit. I want to shout out my sister, Attorney Kelechi Nnodim Akimbosede, and everyone, and of course my wonderful sister, Sister Lana James, who is also online. Sister Helena, shout out to you. Thank you for being here. And if I want to encourage you, if you're out there, go ahead and throw a comment in the chat, questions, comments, feedback. How did you find this? What are some thoughts? What did you agree with? But what did you disagree with? We love challenges here, but I want to shout you out and thank you so much for being part of us. Let's start with actually Sister Lana. Sister Lana made a comment earlier, and I want to lift that up. And there she is. Oh my gosh, yes, Sister Lana, you are welcome. Sister Lana is joining us all the way from Canada, Toronto, and she had some. Sister Lana does exciting work in AI and machine learning, and again is my my right hand when it comes to the Canada-U.S. Coalition to End Race Correction in Healthcare. And so she had quite some responses to your comments, Dr. Nnodim, around science and Germany, and sort of that very troublesome role of those two, just the juxtaposition there that we teased out, I think, respectfully. And so she says, I cite Jacobson's work about war scientists, including the person that you mentioned. She writes about the movement of Nazi tech and scientists abroad who got away without paying the consequences. And so, Sister Lana, if you are there and you're able to speak, would you like to sort of expand on that so we can learn something? Lana? Okay, she was having sound issues on Twitter as well. So hopefully we can get that reconciled. Feel free to throw in the direct messaging if you want to kind of let me know what's going on. Let's move to here. Sivas, thank you for your comments. And thus why to produce justice, guaranteeing that no one is mistreated and guaranteeing that those who need help the most get the most constructive help. Absolutely. And I think Sivas was responding to some of your comments around addressing justice approaches as it relates to the not just the war but the legacy that we're dealing with currently. Thank you so much for that comment. Mrs. Nnodim says, very deep and thought-provoking, a beginning of a rethink of what matters most to us in our moving towards stability. Great interview, and kudos to both Drs. Ijeoma Nnodim Opara and Joseph Nnodim. And thank you so much for that feedback. We appreciate you. And yes, I love the use of the word rethink. Right? Like we need this is a reimagination. I think what I will turn that into as a question, Dr. Nnodim, is in what ways do you hope for people to begin to rethink or even reimagine the legacy of Nigeria-Biafra war today? What is the reimagination? What is the rethinking that should happen after your readers read your book?
Again, it's I'd say my hope is that there'd be more nuanced and more reflective of what the situation was then, and invest some more thinking on their own on how it's affected our present. What tends to happen? What tends to happen? It's a very, very superficial, simplistic appraisal. Oh well, Biafra succeeded. Shouldn't have. They got clobbered. Got them back in. Story ends. Now they have to pay the price of having been defeated in war. So everything is justified. Every maltreatment of people from that part of the country is justified on the basis of the fact that there was a war which they lost. Mm-hmm. There is a presidential candidate in the race this time around, and I've not been following it very closely, unfortunately. But the much I hear is that initially there was opposition to his candidacy for the main reason that it was from that part of the country, Igbo. You know, those.
His name is Steve Obi.
Peter
Obi. Sorry.
Yeah.
Peter Obi.
So those tired attitudes and dispositions towards the Igbo, how they want to take over and how they want to, totally meaningless. So I really hope they think some more. You've had Igbo pretty much off the levers of political power in the country for 60 years now or thereabouts, mostly on the periphery. Every attempt to reduce them to insignificant existence has pretty much failed. At the individual level, they've continued to work very, very, very hard, which is an ethnic attribute. The Igbo believe in hard work. They like success. They valorize success, and they know that the best guarantor of success is hard work. So they work hard. I'm not saying you won't find the isolated Igbo laggard somewhere who's not doing well. You will, certainly will. But as a group characteristic, it's valid. The Igbo work very, very, very hard, which is why they've been able to transcend many of the impediments that were deliberately put on their path. Yeah, we say there was no victor, no vanquished. I did comment. I spent some time in the book on that ridiculous expression. And there was a victor and there was a vanquished, and the vanquished paid the cost. And continue to. So I'm making a call for them to rethink. The thinking all along has been this. They did this, they did that, they failed, so we'll punish them. Okay, now go back. That's pretty much nonsense at this point. Go back and rethink what exactly happened. How come this situation arose? The Igbo were in the vanguard of the struggle for Nigeria independence, who were overrepresented in the number of people who struggled for Nigeria's independence. Most of our earlier politicians at the time, in that era, went to school here in the United States. They brought back these ideas of freedom and self-determination and so on and so forth, which was very troublesome to the British. They were the people who gave the British fire. Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, Dr. Kingsley Mbadiwe, Dr. Nwafọ Orizu, Mr. Mbono GK. They were the people who fought very, very, very hard. Along with us, some others for Nigeria. All of a sudden, we became the whipping boy. We became the whipping boy, and everybody could just dump on us, and at the slightest provocation or no provocation whatsoever, you'd kill, and it just happening repeatedly. Prices up, repeatedly. Every so often, it's in northern part of the country, they would kill. They just pounce on the Igbo and kill them in very large numbers, and nothing happens. Nobody else gets held to account. It kept happening, and then the war happened. The war took place. Then after that, the situation. So I think there'll be some people. Anybody who bothers to read that book will hopefully get a certain sense for that need to rethink. That most of the thinking at this point is probably flawed and not very productive. It's not led to a good place. And look at where we are.
Absolutely. I mean, there's just ample opportunity to rethink. And cause folks to begin to ask questions. Wait a minute. How did we get here in the first place? Not accept things on a surface level, but to really ask, how did we get here in the first place? Lana, before we get to our last question for today, And that is from the wonderful Sivas. But I think it's a great question. I love it because I love the way it again pulls in. We try to again have that Pan-African perspective and pull in the diaspora. So I love this as our final question. But it sounds like Sister Lana has gotten her audio together, and I'm so grateful because these are two people I actually have been trying to get in the same actual room in person at some point this year. So I'm glad it's happening virtually because they're two very brilliant people who are very similar in the ways you intellectualize and theorize and analyze, critical current events through the lens of historical realities and contextualize it accordingly. So, Lana, why don't you introduce yourself to Papa and and kind of share any reflections you have, whether it's what you offered in the comments, but just I know that you are very well versed in diaspora events, including the Nigeria-Biafra War, even though you do present yourself humbly as a student, saying that you're waiting to read the book to learn more. But I also know that you have incredible perspective on this. And as you have listened, and thank you for doing that over the course of what we're closing on, closing on our second hour when we'll end, what is coming up for you? What are the comments you want to make or feedback you want to offer or questions you want to ask at this time? The floor is yours.
Thank you. And I hope my mic is working now and that you can hear me clearly.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Oh my, it has been 2 hours of trying to do this. I want to say it's wonderful to meet you, Dr. Opara. It is lovely to meet you. I've heard wonderful things about you. And I had a chance to check out your chapter summaries, but I have not had the opportunity to read the work. In terms of for folks, who am I? I'm the co-host that I work with, Dr. Nnodim Opara. Ijoma and I do many things together in terms of where I am. I'm in Toronto, Canada, and I'm on the traditional lands of the Mississauga Credit of the First Nation, the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, Chippewa, and Huron-Wendat nations. And I think, locating and even doing that land acknowledgement is a direct, tie to what we're talking about here. Often when we're thinking about time and place in the Americas and being in Canada, the way in which Black people and African people are cast as if we fall out of the sky. Yeah. It's as if settler colonialism in Canada and the continent are so vastly different. They're often presented as if they are not even on the same planet, right? It's as if something completely separate has happened that has no relationship, when in fact that has been a central playbook of practicing and reiterating between the continent of Africa and the region of the Americas. And there's two things I wanted to flag really quickly. One is around the movement of scientists and technologies from World War II, and much of what we have in artificial intelligence, what we have in medicine, has been gotten in very non-ethical ways. And I think that is part of the reason some of our clinical interventions are so violent, so harmful, and we've stunted the work that could have happened, for instance, in cancer, as a result of following along the lines in other areas of pharmaceutical care applied to medicine, because of all of the work that happened in World War II that was assumed by America and the Allied forces. It continued down that path. And I'm citing here one person in particular that I think is valuable for folks that may not decide to go down the full rabbit hole. The author is Annie Jacobson, and the book is called Operation Paperclip: The Secret Intelligence Program That Brought Nazi Scientists to America. The gentleman that Dr. Opara Sr. spoke to is actually identified in this text, and a number of those scientists and what they did. And interestingly, part of what they did also contributed to the kind of science and technology and methods that were used in many of the sites that were colonized. And so I think it's important that we draw those connections. And here in Canada, those scientists also came and got to live out their lives without any kind of real interruption. And so when we talk about these technologies moving and how they were actually gained, which were through very unethical, violent experiments performed by a cohort of experts that were physicians, that were engineers, that were mathematicians, that were scientists, to make all of this quote happen. And so I think, when we think about Germany and we think about technology and we think about consequences, I think it's important to read books like Operation Paperclip, because it shows the relationship between the Allied forces. And I always like to point out that the tribes of Europe have never been able to get along very well. So much so that that's why they're all over the world, because they could not, the peninsula of Eurasia, where that small 5% of the population, and some of those are our listeners and participants, have a long history of not being able to get along equitably and to fight with each other to the point where they spill over, right? They spill over, and their spillover in was called, the age of discovery, but it was really the reality of people who couldn't saddle a horse together, and they took that fight on the road and all the madness that went with it. And so I really think it's important that we understand that many of the violences of tribal European intra-warfare then got exported, and the mentality of not being able to get along with your neighbor. I always note that colonization brought the worst out in everyone they touched, right? So when they arrived in places, they wanted to see the same kind of discord of relationship that they had used to internally colonize themselves. So I think it's really important that we take, Cedric Robinson's work here, an African American, who engaged a lot with thinking critically about Africa, the Caribbean, and the Americas, and how he pointed out that Europe's racial history itself is what was imposed on the continent of Africa and what was imposed on the Americas. And a lot of what we think of as medicine are actually refined eugenics programs, right? Masquerading as something else. And so I just wanted to point out to people that if you have not read Operation Paperclip, it's important, because often Black people are told, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. Well, you don't have to read a conspiracy theory. You can read European, American, and Allied forces history as they wrote it. And they allowed Nazi scientists to not only they actually did the Nuremberg trial. Several of them sat on the Nuremberg trial. Like, they physically went up and bore witness, admitted what they did, got off the stand, and got in a plane for America and Canada. So the ways in which, Nigeria, colonial construction of what we call Nigeria, and the powers that be that helped the war against the Biafrans be lost is, again, this kind of puppeteering, right? Because even when the Allied forces had to put down one of their own Europeans, they still took up their scientists. They still took up that knowledge. And in America, the one thing you'll have all in one place, because for those of us that have to do this research, it's tied directly to artificial intelligence. And that's why I know it so well, because the history of artificial intelligence is the culmination of material, intellectual thought, scientific thought, put together, mobilized during World War II, refined, and now what has largely been a military process is now being brought into medicine, education, and war has always been about business. So that's, all par for the course. So in that text, they talk intimately about how those scientists they have wings named after them. Yes, they were part of the space program. When you watch the movie Hidden Figures, one, the moment where she gets let in the room didn't happen in real life. She was kept out of the room. And during that period, it is the same period where these Nazi scientists are working in the US space program. And this is why the movie Hidden Figures, this is why some people were like, how come, yeah, America may have had and continues to have a deep racial rift, but this was reinforced during that period. And what's interesting for someone like me who reads across these disciplines is I actually had to stop, go and find all the women's dates of birth and service to the US state program, then match up all these German scientists in Canada and the US and find out where they were positioned. And I was like, oh my God, they were literally in the same geography. So that scene we see in the movie where you can't go to this bathroom, whatever, this was all reinforced. And there wasn't as if no one had an issue with it. There were many white Americans within it who abhorred the Germans being able to enter the military, take up homes, be paid inordinate amounts of money, have wings named after them. And so when we ask the question, what about Black people in STEM? So relating it back to what you've talked about, Dr. Opara Sr., is when you relate it back to STEM, STEM takes off post-World War II. And it takes off because the Allied forces and the Germans go back to collude together to recolonize and hold their assets. so that nothing like the Biafran War, because that was a good, I just want to say this, you know, in a fangirl kind of way, when Ijoma said you would be on and we'd be talking about this, I was like, oh my God, since I was a kid, I've been reading about this thing and I want to talk to a real life person, because these are accounts of Americans and British and largely colonizers and those who have been colonized intellectually. So I was interested in asking questions because it's so important to understand the experiments that have happened as Black people have tried to assert our freedom. The experiment of Sierra Leone, right? The experiment of Freetown, right? How African Americans in that Garveyite kind of movement, quote, got sent back, but then wanted to play the colonizer to their own indigenous brothers and sisters. And when they were getting their ass whooped by, quote, the natives, they called white mama and daddy. That's the only reason they won and why we have Freetown in the history the way that we do. So it's often rewritten as this wonderful, and I'm like, no, this is not the relationship. So I think the ways in which Europe cannot contain its intertribal warfare to this moment where we're struggling with Putin and people being, again, more white colonizers being moved around the world. And here dropped recently into our artificial intelligence programs with no questions, given the rise of right-wing Nazism in the Ukraine. We're in a moment again where the past and the present. So I just want to say, one, thank you for this book. I'm looking forward to digging into it. Two, the movement of scientists and technology was integral to the ongoing assault against Africans and Black people trying to get free across the continent of Africa and in the diaspora, particularly in the Americas. They use that technology. And there's one quote, and I'm trying to find which text I found it in. It's somewhere on my shelf, where the CIA, FBI asked the question of the US government, can AI be used to solve the Negro problem? Like, let's think about that. That's where it begins. That's how they begin to think about AI when it comes to Blackness. And so again, the Biafran War is this moment where, yes, it's the first time that I think people really understand what an armed struggle for justice looks like and how violent it can be. But I think it also, for folks that didn't understand regional or the history of how the colony of Nigeria became the country of Nigeria, it also made it appear as if it was organic, as if it arose out of these ethnicities, when in fact it was the process of colonization that changed the arrangements that had proceeded for so many thousands of years, that created the need for a kind of resistance to a forced reconfiguration of identity. And so as Europe tried to redefine itself as a world power, as a supreme power, and to instantiate white supremacy, putting down Biafra was important as it was to put down Haiti. And this is the question I had just messaged to Ijeoma, if I could not get on to ask it. And I'll stop here, which is for you, Dr. Opara Sr., which is, given what the Biafran War appears to be from my mind, right, I'm all the way out here, you know, from a historical perspective, I always wondered, was it not interdicted? Did the war not get won because, in fact, it was how the world powers responded to Haiti? It again was a Tulsa. It was a Grenada. It's an example of what happens when Black people refuse the yoke of racial and ethnic division that comes from outside and assert their self-determination and, dare we say, sovereignty to live a decent life where we are not in disagreement with each other, but proceeding as we were before these folks showed up. Because to me, if the Biafran War had been won, everything is different. That's why they couldn't let Haiti proceed. That's why they continue to interdict Jamaica, continue to interfere across the continent. So my question is it incorrect? And again, not collapsing or conflating these events, but with the frame of understanding that when Black people, African people, assert their freedom, not request it, but assert what already is, and when necessary, take up arms to protect that, that the, quote, America, Europe, and the colonizer will do anything to aid and abet anyone who will prevent that. And if that happens to be, in this case, you know, the, quote, other ethnic groups within Nigeria, that they'll arm them as they did arm the African Americans against their own indigenous peoples when they, quote, went back. to Africa? Can we say that Biafra is a different but similar purpose of happening as Haiti, as Tulsa, as the invasion of Grenada? And I just tried to cover everything because I've been having such audio difficulties, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Lana. I mean, I that is one hell of a connection. I'm like, whoa, I didn't even see it from that perspective. So I am really curious to know how Dr. Nnodim will answer it. And my love, he's Dr. Nnodim because Opara is Mr. Opara is my husband, but Dr. Nnodim is but he's also Dr. Nnodim senior anyway, to be honest. He's still a senior too. But no problem. I just thought that was so cute. All right, Dr. Nnodim senior, please take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Lana. This is very, very profound, and really appreciate the insight you provided. Yes, indeed. To your question, the last point you made, the world was not ready for the white world. At least was not ready for Biafra. Biafra was a different way, a different perspective on things. It burst on the scene, conceived in violence, hardened in war, unified in suffering, and it dared to fight for itself, to fight for its independence, not relying on the perfunctory signature of a colonial master on a piece of paper for its independence. It dared fight for it. And they just were not ready for that kind of thinking, that kind of approach to things. And you'd see in the kind of alliances that formed, the Soviet Union and Great Britain were on the same side in opposition to Biafra. They supplied weapons to Nigeria, to the federal forces. So Biafra was a totally different way of doing things, which they couldn't abide. So you're very correct. You're very correct, and that too, United States couldn't stand Haiti. The success of the 1804 revolution, frightened the hell out of them. They know it was I think it was the Lincoln administration that finally accorded diplomatic recognition to Haiti. This is in 1860. Over half a century after Haiti had established itself. So yeah, that kind of a thing does happen. Like Haiti, the white world wasn't ready for Biafra, and obviously that had its consequences. All sorts of things were thrown at Biafra, which is unbelievable. The kind of trauma they had to go through. The Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact, pilots from West Germany, pilots from Czechoslovakia, then Britain itself. These string bedfellows on the same side, they pitched their camps on the federal side of the conflict. So you're very correct. You're very correct. That Biafra was a totally different way of doing things, and they just couldn't have any of it. They couldn't have any of it. At the time, the case was made for genocide. The case was made for genocide. Britain set up what's called IOT, International Observer Team, comprising just to debunk it, just undermine and debunk it, comprising delegates from the
Dr. Nnodim, we lost your audio.
Okay.
Oh, you're back.
I'm back. Yeah. So when the case was made for genocide, Britain set up a team, IOT, International Observer Team, that went to Nigeria, but didn't go to Biafra, and to debunk it. So they said they didn't find any evidence for genocide. So it's that kind of thing. They were very, very uncomfortable with. Biafra was just something else. Even in the midst of all that suffering, they took time to outline the philosophical underpinnings, the philosophical basis of the revolution. Because
Hmm.
Ahara Declaration, intellectuals,
Anyara Declaration.
they sat down and put together a philosophical basis for what was happening. So it's unbelievable. And at other points you mentioned, I'm familiar with, I didn't read Paperclip, but I know the operation Paperclip, which brought Nazi scientists across from Europe to the United States. Indeed, lots of things that are terrible happen in wars, all wars, some worse than others. And I agree with you completely. Penalties should be paid. But unfortunately, the decisions go in ways we're not comfortable with. The Japanese, in fact, the biological warfare program in this country was heavily supported by Japanese doctors. Japanese doctors. That was terrible. That was terrible, but that happens too. Sicilian campaign, Sicilian campaign, Patton did great things in Sicilian, but he was working with the mafia. It was the mafia who led the American troops through Sicily at the clip they went. So these terrible things happen. I take issue more with the life scientists, the physicians, type likes of Joseph Mengele and the rest of them. Those were the ones who did terrible things. But unfortunately, I have a certain fondness for Von Braun. He was very young, and I don't think he was in the Nazi party. He was in the Nazi party. Yes, he was a card-carrying Nazi, but his research couldn't have been supported if he didn't buy in. Terrible things happened, but indirectly, he built these rockets and they dropped bombs and killed lots of people in London and that kind of thing. But yeah, lots of terrible things did happen in war, and the kind of company, especially the United States, kept. And we should be very, very, very alert to. We should be very, very alert to these things and make sure they don't repeat themselves.
Yeah, I think that's where the value of, again, that nuance, constructive analysis comes into play. Lana, thank you. I really appreciate that. I want to be respectful of time, and I want to thank everyone for hanging with us. I want to respect a wonderful supporter of the roundtable, Sivas, and coalesce both your questions into one, Sivas, so that we can bring the space to a conclusion and give everybody back their time. And so Sivas asked a few questions, Dr. Nnodim. I'm going to ask both, and they're both related. And so Sivas asks, the young people, starts with, thank you. Sivas thanks you for everything you've presented on today, presenting yourself, evoking, thought-provoking presentation. And then it goes on to ask, many young people here in the US are intelligent and energetic, and they're yearning for reparations. How do we help address that? And also another question, many of the younger people also see themselves as quote unquote different, but which may be true, or how maybe the need to eliminate white supremacy and replace with justice. And as an urgent need for all of us melanated people. So I think the way that I will probably, sort of lift that up is saying, and this is very interesting, as you know, there's a huge movement for a long time for reparations. So if we're talking about truth and reconciliation, what is the role, right? And I believe there was a conversation about this, paying reparations to the Igbo. Something like that came up at some point in the last few years, I believe. And has that conversation come up around reparations? And how does that speak to Sivas's question as to the movement for reparations here in the diaspora, and then particularly in America? I also want to note that there was a recent, and I'm going to try and pull it up while you're speaking. There was a a recent article that has come up around quote unquote Africa demanding reparations for colonialism. And I'm going to try to pull up precisely what was discussed. So what does the idea of, what role does this idea of reparations in the context of such incredible harm that has transpired, what does that look like, right, within the context of Biafra and the Igbo? And then how does that connect to the movement for reparations here in the US, is how I would sort of frame that question with the conversation. Any thoughts? And we'll try to make it as brief as possible so we can round up.
Yeah, very, very few thoughts really, and very brief indeed. Definitely, reparations are in order. What I'm not clear in my mind is what form it will take, but there has to be a certain acceptance and commitment by the powers that be, who have it within their authority to do what needs to be done, to accept in principle that some kind of remediation by way of reparations is warranted for the past harms done. Now, what would the big arguments come as to what form it will take? Is it a cash payout or special programs and so on and so forth? But then that will be an after discussion. The first step, I think, would be
to acknowledge that it needs to be done. First of all, we'll decide how it is done later. But right now, we need to agree that it needs to be done. Yes. And we did have a roundtable on this topic. I would say, Sivas, maybe later, if you contact me, I will send you, or you actually, if you're on the channel right now, just go ahead and we did do a roundtable on the topic of reparations inside of medicine in the background of historical and ongoing medical healthcare and public health harms as a result of white supremacy and anti-Blackness. So, but it sounds like what I'm hearing Dr. Nnodim say is very supportive of it, and we need to organize just like throughout the diaspora really to to articulate the need for it and ensuring that we get it, and whatever forms it takes, we can hash that out. And I would say that many people have written about it. There's been a lot of scholarship on this, or what it can look like. There was a book that we shared, which I would need to like pull up. But if you go down my timeline, all those resources have already been, disseminated. And if you re-listen to the replay on YouTube channel, and I think the Twitter space is still up, recording, we did list all those out. I think that's a great question, because we do have to have that question even as it relates to the Biafra, the Nigeria-Biafra war. Where does the conversation around reparations lie? But to your point, we're still even in this denial in the first place. How can you repair what you are denying, in the first place? So there's definitely a process that needs to be followed. I think in the diaspora, folks are way ahead and are able to articulate clearly the case is more than made, and we just need to ensure that it happens. And so I believe that the bill is Bill HR 40. Hopefully I'm not saying the wrong one, for the bill for, I believe the committee to study reparations, I believe. But there's a lot going on here in the States around reparations. And I would say for the young people to organize and gather around what are the existing efforts towards it, that we may bring it about, is what I would say. But I think these are great questions, and we need to keep the conversation going. Thank you so much, Dr. Nnodim. Outstanding conversation. Thank you, Sister Lana James, for jumping on. I know that it's always challenging because of the multitasking, but you made the time. Thank you, Sivas. Thank you, Mrs. Nnodim. Thank you, Attorney Akimbosede and Sister Helena, and everybody out there. Thank you, folks on Twitter, bearing with us despite the crashes. And we just kind of let that go and roll with this. We can always share this on the replay. Folks can access it. This has been an outstanding conversation. We've learned so much. We've understood the role of of the Nigeria-Biafra war, how important it was, the significance. Over 1 million children dead by the inhumane practice of starvation as war. We learned about, despite such incredible devastation, that folks were innovative and building. The cholera vaccine developed, even inside of that war by an Igbo physician scientist. The MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, that was formed on the backs of this war. The ways that it captured the global imagination as to the impact of what armed fight for freedom can look like. The ways it's impacting Nigeria of today, the ways it was informed and continues to be informed by the narratives of white supremacism, the ways in which it is very necessary for us to make sure that we order this book on Amazon, coming in 3 weeks, and Barnes and Nobles and wherever near theater, comes to a theater near you, to ensure that if nothing else, we get the renewed perspective to rethink the narrative around this very powerful, important event, to turn the tides of denial to acceptance of what happened. Something terrible happened, and we must right this wrong. We can right this wrong, and that we will never move forward as a nation, but also as part of a powerful, amazing, fantastic diaspora, until we tell the truth about ourselves to each other and walk towards that reconciliation and reparation. And so this has been fantastic towards an understanding of the Nigeria-Biafra civil war and other lingering questions and Igbo perspective by Dr. Joseph Nnodim. Outstanding work. And Dr. Nnodim, please tell folks, first of all, what your concluding remarks are, sort of your final reflections, but also how people can contact you if they have questions they want to. I know Sivas also asked if they can order directly, and they may want to continue this conversation. They may want other resources, what have you. So if you can tell folks how to contact you, that would be great. But also any final reflections that you have for us as we close out this space.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to express my profound gratitude to Amath for having me on this platform, giving me this rare opportunity to share my thoughts on something that's kind of bothered me from my adolescence, and having now given vent to those feelings in writing. This opportunity to talk about it too has been very welcome and cathartic. So thank you very much. Thank you to everybody who tuned in in spite of the technical problems we've had. You stayed on and listened and made contributions to the discussion. I'm very grateful to you. The book, when it comes out, like Dr. Oprah said, is going to be available on Amazon and the main bookstores. I'm going to try. I'm from another different generation, but I'm going to try and get more active on Twitter and really take questions. Take not so much questions as continue to share. I never have answers. I will continue to share my thoughts and read and listen to what others have to say. So I'll be glad to do that, and I definitely will try to get more active on social media to get that done. Yeah, definitely. When the book becomes available and you flip through the pages, it will provoke more thoughts, and you get in touch with me, and then I will, add some more perspective to what you might be reading. So thank you very much. Thank you. I'm very, very grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you again. You heard Dr. Nnodim. You can reach him on Twitter. He's going to take over Twitter. You know, I have no doubt that my father is going to rack up all the followers and leave my black ass in the back somewhere. He will have 100,000 followers, and I'll still be like, oh, okay. I'll be a social media giant. But you can reach him on Twitter at J_score. Is that correct? Nnodim. The at J_Nnodim, at J_NNODIM, and he will be able to, you know, connect with you there. You can direct message him or just post, and he's also going to be more active, and of course with the help of his children and grandchildren to take over social media. Well, thank you again for being an outstanding audience. Just so amazing. And I hope that this conversation was of value to you and informs your work, and that you're able to take something out of this that really adds incredible value and perspective to the work that you do, to love yourself, love each other, build community, and build power. Ubuntu. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Enjoy your weekend.